Namaste and good evening, everyone. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my heartiest welcome to you all to this IMPRI Web Policy Talk. Today, we are here for a special talk as part of the series, The State of Gender Equality Gender Gaps on Using Technology to Address Gender-Based Violence by Elsa Mary De Silva. I would now like to welcome our moderator, Ms. Anshula Mehta, who is Assistant Director at IMPRI, to introduce the speaker further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritika. Good evening to everyone, and I welcome you all to episode 28 in our Gender Gaps Talk series. Today, as Ritika pointed out, we have Ms. Elsa Marie De Silva speaking on using technology to address gender-based violence, and it's my pleasure to introduce her to you all. Elsa Marie De Silva is the founder of Red Dot Foundation India and president of Red Dot Foundation Global USA. Its platform, Safe City, crowdsources personal experiences of sexual violence and abuse in public spaces. Since Safe City started in December 2012, it has become the largest crowd map on the issue in India and abroad. She is a 2020 Gratitude Network Fellow, 2019 IWF Fellow, and a Regan Fassel Fellow, a 2018 Yale World Fellow, and an alumna of the Stanford Draper Hill Summer School, the US State Department's Fortune Mentoring Program, Oxford Chevening Gurukul, and the Duke of Edinburgh's Commonwealth Leadership Program. She co-founded the Gender Alliance, which is a cross-network initiative bringing together feminists from the BMW Foundation, Herbert Quant's Responsible Leaders Network, the Global Diplomacy Lab, the Bosch Alumni Network, and Global Leadership Academy Community by GIZ. She is listed as one of BBC Hindi's 100 Women and has won several awards, including Government of India Niti Aayog's Women Transforming India Award and the Digital Woman Award in Social Impact by She the People. In 2017, she was awarded the Global Leadership Award by Vital Voices in the presence of Secretary Hillary Clinton. She is a co-editor and author of The Demographic Dividend and the Power of Youth, published by Anthem Press on behalf of the German Federal Foreign Office's Global Diplomacy Lab. She has penned articles that have appeared in CNN, Huffington Post, WIP, amongst others. Prior to Safe City, she was in the aviation industry for 20 years, where she worked with Jet Airways and Kingfisher Airlines. Her last portfolio was Vice President, Network Planning and Charters, where she oversaw the planning and implementation of 500 daily flights. Welcome, ma'am, and thank you for taking out the time to deliver this talk today. We have with us as well our chair for the session, respected Professor Vibhuti Patel, who is an eminent professor, a gender economist, and a women's rights activist. And she was formerly the chairperson and a professor at the Advanced Center for Women's Studies at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TIS, Mumbai. And she was also professor and head of the Department of Economics at SNDT Women's University, Mumbai. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. And we are also joined by two discussants who will reflect on the talk. Dr. Sangeeta Datta Gupta, who is currently Associate Professor of Economics and Chairperson, Center for Research at the Jagdish Sheth School of Management, which was formerly IFIM Business School. And we also have with us Ms. Riti Mandal, who is a Senior Program Manager at SafetyPin, which is an organization working to make public spaces safe and more inclusive for women. So I welcome all our participants today, and I thank you all for taking out the time. With that, I hand it over to you, Professor Vibhuti Patel, to make your initial remarks and then invite Ms. Elsa Marie for her presentation. Thank you. Ma'am, you are on mute.
So good evening, friends. First of all, I would like to express my hearty thanks to Dr. Arjun Kumar and Ritika Gupta and Anshula Mehta for giving me this opportunity to address the extremely important subject which we are facing over last month. Just now I'm recovering from the shock of Zoom bombing for my previous valedictory lecture on care economy. And I think the way technology, first of all, technology is both we are using, and today's topic is about using technologies to address gender-based violence. And I think we have done it in a big way because ICTs are also being used by women's groups, students and youth organizations to build campaigns, anti-rape campaigns after Nirbhaya tragedy, the wide use of Facebook and Twitter, we could see in cities after cities, just one Twitter message and people would come out in protest. We have seen that working women, young adults, both boys and girls facing sexual advances, blackmail and threat of rape and murder. They have also used this. I remember when I was in Sophia Center for Women's Studies, a girl was using a stalker, was threatening girl of a murder and all that. And when the police, when she complained to the police say he had kept a collar tune of a bhajan, Ganpati bhajan, Sukha Karta, Dukha Karta. And the police says, oh, he's such a religious, pious man. How can he do that? And then we taught our girls that how to record anytime the stalker says nasty things. And next time when he rang up, the recording was done and it was submitted to the police and action was taken. And this is, I'm talking of the year 2002. We have come long way. So the students are using smartphone, mobiles, computers, laptops to access support from the community of peers, to build evidence with audiovisual recording, take photographs to shoo away stalkers. In my college, when the girls were being one stalker was flashing continuously, girls started coming to college, and when we after a lot of probing, they confided. They did not tell their family members, but at least to the teachers they said that they felt very embarrassed because this man in safari looked highly educated and posh. He was doing like that, and we just said that there is nothing great about it. Just pretend to be taking picture with your mobile. All of you have your mobile. And next time when that man did behaved like that, all the girls they took out. And first of all, they were moving in a group. That's what we had told them, that always move in a group. And they took a pic. They pretended to take a photograph, and immediately that man ran away. We have seen even in adolescent girls and boys in bastis, they are also making a very productive and safe use of this kind of technology to raise awareness about gender-based violence among families and communities, and also monitor and evaluate interventions and measures, measure their impact, that to what extent they have been effective. So social isolation during COVID-19 induced lockdown has resulted in increasing incidences of cyber crimes against women and girls, and lonely elderly women have also been defrauded and cheated by withdrawal of all their cash deposited in the bank account. Gender-based violence against LGBTQIA communities and persons with disabilities have escalated exponentially. Lessons of the boys' locker room, an ISTA group that was created by adolescent boys of elite educational institution, has made it imperative that sustained public education of girls and women, parents and citizens on nature, causes and consequences of cybercrime, to change the misogynist mindset and toxic masculinity and the violent behavior in a cyberspace is ensured. And National Commission for Women, State Commission for Women, colleges, they have also started the capacity building regarding explaining the types of online abuse, cybercrime, demystifying all the terminologies which are used, what is doxing and cyberbullying and trolling and Zoom bombing and pylon and all that. And they have also also talked about we are teaching the girls to how to safeguard oneself from online abuse and also offline abuse, and reporting the mechanisms for online abuse, as well as how to approach the criminal justice system, cyber cell, and also reporting to the authorities about online abuse. Various the Ministry of Women and Child Development have also come up with their own link, where we can I am a trolled help, or various helplines which they have created can be approached. And comprehensive recommendations have also been given at a local level, state level, and national level to the concerned authorities, Ministry of Women and Child Development. So it is in this context that this is the background in which we are debating today's topic of use of online internet in addressing violence against women by Elsa Marie de Silva. And I think she will enlighten us with her global experience, and also we will be able to sharpen our tools to combat and address violence against women. Over to Elsa Marie de Silva. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vibhuti, and thank you, IMPRI, for having me here today. Good evening to everyone. I'm Elsa, and I'm based out of Mumbai, India. I'm just going to show you a short presentation of our work because it helps to visually see what I'm talking about. So I just want to say this is a wall mural that we painted with young college girls outside Sapphire College in Mumbai, where sexual harassment was a crime, and that came out through the various reports that were pinned on our site. But this wall mural came out from a discussion on the topic and what they wanted to do to solve it. So as you well know, this is a global statistic. It's a global pandemic where 1 in 3 women on an average experience some form of sexual assault at least once in their lifetime. And the other statistic is more than half of these victims are girls, and it happens before they turn 16. But in most cases, they're not reported to the police. And this is really the problem that we at Safe City are trying to focus, the underreporting of this data. As you would have heard when my bio was announced, I used to be in the aviation sector and I was used to handling data to make business decisions. And in December 2012, when Jyoti Singh got gang raped, that's when I tried to make sense of what was happening and try to understand the scale of the problem, because I was in my aviation bubble at that time. And I could not find statistics for India. I couldn't find statistics at my local level. And that got me thinking about, okay, how do I want to contribute towards being part of the solution? And along with my friends, I launched Safe City. But one of the big areas that I have found is that sexual violence and abuse is a spectrum. It starts with nonverbal at one end, which is staring, ogling, taking pictures, indecent gestures, uh, masturbation in public spaces. There's also verbal, commenting, catcall, sexual invites, and then the physical, touching, groping, stalking, sexual assault, and rape. But often, many people think that sexual assault is rape, and they tend to ignore the other forms that are listed on the screen. And these are just some of them. We are also, this is like in the physical world, and Professor Vibhuti also spoke about the virtual world where some of these happen, like trolling and stalking, but there's also many other forms of it. But if we don't see many of these things as a crime, we tend to normalize it. We tend to make it very difficult for a person who's experiencing it to speak up and share their experiences. And they definitely don't have the confidence to go to the police or any official authority to make that complaint. I sit and my team members sit on at least 25 sexual harassment committees with corporates. And let me tell you that it's very, very hard for women to speak up. And most often they make that complaint when they resign from the company, which just tells you that the intention of the law was to create a safe space for reporting and also the investigation of that incident. But the way it is being used, women actually resign and then put in that complaint. That tells us that they're not confident of speaking up whilst they are with that company. So what do we do at Safe City? We encourage anonymous reporting of people's personal experiences of sexual and gender-based violence. This is then plotted and geotagged, shown on the map as stories. So all these bubbles with numbers on them correspond to stories that people have shared with us. And the idea is not only to crowdsource the data, but to make it available in the open source format so that it is out there for anyone to use at the individual level or the community level or the institutional level. Now, I come from the aviation industry, right? It's one of the most safest means of transport. But that is because there's a lot of investment that goes into towards building safety measures and also individual situational awareness. If you've taken a flight, you would have witnessed the demonstration that the crew do prior to every takeoff. That demonstration is actually to build the situational awareness of the people traveling on the plane, because every plane is designed for evacuation within 90 seconds. No matter if it is a huge plane like a 380 or a tiny plane like an ATR. It depends on the number of exits, and everything is designed for 90-second evacuation, but that is possible only if everyone is situationally aware. Now take when we as individuals experience sexual harassment, we freeze. There are three ways we can respond. We fight back, we flee from the scene, or we freeze. Most often we freeze because we are taken by surprise. And then later we beat ourselves up emotionally saying that wasn't a great response. But if you had this information available to you, could you build your situational awareness? Could you then respond in different ways, not to avoid areas, but to deal with it and to respond quicker? And there are many responses to a particular incident. It's just that when you're taken by surprise, you don't know how to react. So what is the aim of our reporting platform is really to gather information, that is stories and incidents, publish it in the open source format, and then study the patterns and trends by location and category. We last year took the opportunity during COVID to rebuild our whole platform to comply with GDPR, but also to create an empathy layer to aid in reporting. We also have advanced ways to protect the identity and privacy, and we've included a lot of nudge information so that people can access helplines and legal information that is linked to the category that they are reporting. And who are our target audiences? We have two. One is information seekers. So some of you who are on this call are researchers. You could use our data set, like many have done before you, to understand the problem better. But also there are people who are looking for help information. There are people looking at our map to educate themselves on what kind of crime is happening in their neighborhood or at a place that they wish to visit. Take, for example, TripAdvisor. A lot of us use peer review apps, and TripAdvisor is one of them. As a person who travels solo for leisure and for business, I know Professor Vibhuti told those girls that they should travel in groups, but often you may not have that opportunity. So if you have to travel alone, how do you still build your comfort level in responding to uncomfortable situations? So that the information could aid you in that. Reporters for personal stories, but it's, that's the first step, in my opinion, to seeking further help. And then, of course, those who are looking, who want to report on behalf of others and looking for safety tips or adding to the safety tips. So this is how our new interface looks like. On the left-hand side, you have the crowd map. On the right-hand side, you have the individual stories. You can search by area. Right now, it's zoomed into Delhi. So you can see all these bubbles. And when we analyze these patterns, we find that actually across the city, the pattern of crime is very different. So Lal Kua may be something, Connaught Place may have something else, Malviya Nagar may have something else, and that is really how you can help. You can actually use that data. You can query the data by the category, you can query it by time of day, or any of these parameters. The help information is linked to the category. So for example, if I'm reporting stalking, at the end of my report, I will get a nudge for the IPC on stalking, the helplines that are available, and also they can do a Google search for the hospital and the police station near them. And the idea is really to pick up what happened, the location, date, time, age, gender, and ethnicity, or disability or sexual orientation, to deep dive into why they experience that. We also have the ability for that person to report very voluntarily secondary information, which is separate from the primary form, so that we can understand the causation and correlation of why that incident occurred, more information about the perpetrator or the bystanders, how did they react, and some information about the location and the incident context. Also, the safety tips are similar. So we want to encourage people to report, what has worked for them, what action they've taken, etc. Ours is a low-cost, low-tech solution. And what we found is that you can't just put a piece of tech out there. It has to be complemented with a lot of in-person interaction. So we do a lot of workshops helping people understand the spectrum of abuse, their rights, how they can use Safe City as a platform if they don't want to go down the formal route of making a complaint, or even if they made a formal complaint, how this data can still help them, because it's so granular at the local neighborhood level. And we encourage simple individual action, but also can they use that data to engage their communities to make that change, whilst also driving for institutional accountability with the police or civic authorities. So some of the examples are, like I said, can individuals make better choices for their own safety? If you look at the data for Delhi along the metro lines, Nehru Place being the hub for the metro, I'm talking of pre-COVID, was very crowded, and under the guise of crowded spaces, perpetrators have a comfort zone to touch you, comment, stalk you, whatever. But if you take the next station, which is I think I'm forgetting, I think it's Kalyani Nagar or something in K, but that metro station has hardly any reports. So if somebody like me from Mumbai who's traveling to Delhi does not really want to get off at Nehru Place, I may choose another option. It might be a longer walk or a little longer auto ride, which is the last mile connectivity. But it is, in my view, something that I would be comfortable with. Or for example, the Mumbai data. A lot of it is along the railway lines, and Kurla for some reason keeps coming up. And Kurla is a rail hub. Now, and what comes up over there is groping. So maybe I'm prepared. I know that somebody is going to grope me, and I'm prepared, and I will react faster to hold that hand and maybe twist it, or some people carry safety pins where you just poke that person. Now, all this you will say should not be our daily worry, but the reality is it is, right? So till the authorities fix this infrastructure and fix the situation, whilst we do a lot of gender sensitivity workshops, on a day-to-day basis, you still have to live your life. And what we are trying to do is give you that information which you can build on your own situational awareness for better and quicker responses. Communities. We have used this very effectively in many different communities in different parts of India, but also in Kenya, Nepal, Cameroon, etc. And we've also used it in rural areas. Now, just the fact that they have access to this data makes these women and girls build their confidence to respond. And we found that art, and the first picture with the individual is really this girl painting staring eyes. So we've seen wherever we've had hotspots, if you put a wall mural, and we call them talking walls, it has a great impact, because you're in a way putting the community on notice to say, hey, listen, there's a problem over here, and the wall actually talks about the problem. But on another level, those women, and especially in this particular location, they were illiterate. They never challenged possibly the perpetrator. But through the wall, they're painting all these things with subtle messaging like, look with your heart, not with your eyes. We won't be intimidated by your gaze. We will speak up. We will break our silence. And it was so effective to put the community on notice that actually it reduced the staring, the loitering. In fact, when a journalist went to check on what was the reaction, the tea stall owner. So this was near a tea stall where, as you know, it's a male-only space. Men would hang out, loiter over there and intimidate the women and girls with their constant male gaze and also their commenting. But when, after this wall mural, when the journalist went and asked the tea stall owner, he said, I tell them to move on. I don't allow this loitering to, happen. And we've seen the same happen outside Sophia College. In fact, the wall murals were even put up outside public toilets. They were very effective in getting the community to fix the broken infrastructure like toilets, the doors and windows of the toilets, and lighting. Now, lighting and safety pin is here, so they'll also tell you that lighting is one of the big things which contributes to the perception of whether a place is safe or unsafe. And when it's dark, a lot of families also prevent the girls from going out. And to me, that is really, a problem that we really need to shift our mindsets on. Because coming again from the corporate sector, when does networking happen? Or when I did my higher, like my post graduation, it was all after office hours. And if a woman or a girl is restricted from accessing a public space throughout the day or even at the night, she has limited opportunities to educate herself or to move upward in her career or even to take a better job. So lighting plays one of those roles. And then what's the role of institutions? Can they use this data to work with the community to find local solutions? Can they build trust between communities? We have found that this actually helps communities have conversations with the police, with the civic authorities, even with the railway authorities, and you can push for change. And with the data out in the public domain as open source, these institutional stakeholders also on their own, are compelled to do stuff. So how have we used the data? I've said police, school and college administration. Before COVID, with the Canadian High Commission, we did a project in Maharashtra across 20 college campuses, Mumbai, Pune, and in Satara. And many of these colleges didn't even have sexual harassment policies, but post that they had it. There was an audit done on their campus. They started conversations with their students, but amongst the students too, there was a lot of conversation happening. And then with the elected representatives, communities can ask them for budgets. Our elected representatives love putting CCTV cameras everywhere. In this one community, they were able to pinpoint where they wanted the CCTV cameras. So I'm not saying that CCTV cameras are the solution, but if that is going to be the solution, then at least you should have a say in where do they go, And then, of course, in Malaysia, for example, they are collecting data to push for legislative change. In Cameroon, for example, there are no laws, so they are using the data there as well. And really, it's to help you. This data helps you have a deeper discussion on gender, sexuality, sexual violence, which are all taboo topics, and there are not many safe spaces to talk about it. Of course, discussion on the local statistics and how it affects each one. And then to use it to organize and mobilize communities for that localized change. And ours is very, very local. So at every place, the solutions are different, and we leave it to the community to decide how they really want to use that data to bring about the change. So some of the visualizations that we are now working on, and we've tried to show, because not everybody can understand what a crowd map is. So trying to break it down in different visual formats by time of day, day of week, categories, or even by location to tell you where are these happening, so that you can start to think about what are the solutions. And our model is empower the individual really to take that action or engage his or her community to bring about that change. So where are we right now after almost 8.5 years? We have almost 19,000 reports, and we have 10 country chapters in different countries. We've used the data to engage 750,000 citizens. We've trained over 30,000 people in gender sensitization and understanding this methodology of ours. We've also trained 500 youth leaders on college campuses, and we are very active on social media. So those are our coordinates. Do get in touch. We also have a missed call. Like I said, you can't just put technology out there. So there are multiple ways for people to report. There's the web app, the apps on Android and iOS. We have a missed call. We also put boxes, which we call talking boxes, in communities where people can put little notes, and that is digitized. And the idea is to, not let technology be the barrier to reporting, but really the enabler to understand what is happening, have that conversation in your own neighborhood, and make that change happen using the data. So thank you.
Yeah. I think thank you, Elsa. For a technophobe like me, I think I must have understood half of your thing about the technology part, but I think ideology part is very, very important. And I think both of, and we need more and more capacity building exercises. And I think now I request discussants to give their response. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anshula,
So
you are there. You are there. tomorrow.
yes, ma'am. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Elsa Marie, for such a great presentation. So we have our first discussant, Dr. Sangeeta Datta Gupta, who is Associate Professor Economics at the Jagdish Seth School of Management. Ma'am, over to you. Ma'am, please
You have to
unmute yourself.
unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Good evening to all, and thank you, IMPRI, for inviting me to be a discussant. And it's extremely relevant and important topic. And thank you, Ms. Elsa, for a wonderful presentation. So now, gender-based violence. Of course, it's a if you talk about gender-based violence, it's a cause of grave concern, and it's basically a violation of human rights, and it's not confined to any particular geographical location, urban or rural area, or to any specific caste, creed, or religion. So Miss Elsa actually mentioned about certain innovative ways to protect women from sexual violence, and and ICT actually is playing and can play an important role to protect women from violence, sexual violence. It can help in mapping data, mapping violence, gathering data, and that data can be used for change, which Elsa was talking about. And it can also provide support and information to the survivors, to women. So ICT can be very, very effective to address this gender-based violence. But I have just one point I would like to add, because I have been working with rural micro entrepreneurs, and I've just published something which is about the technology adoption for women, and leading to entrepreneurial orientation. So while the smartphones are all, very effective in the cities, but in the rural areas where there is a lack of access to the device itself. So probably going forward, we need to think about ways how we can, because sexual violence, gender-based violence is rampant in the rural areas as well. It's not confined to cities. How to address those problems, because marginalized women, they don't have access to um, a smartphone, and sometimes they are not literate, they don't even know how to use it. So those are the things which we can address. But of course, we Elsa and others, they are doing wonderful things to help women, and it's a step in the right direction. And going forward, I'm sure that we'll be able to penetrate that also, and help the marginalized women and the women in the rural areas as well. So thank you once again, and it's an extremely good presentation, and lots of information and insights for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Next, we have Ms. Riti Mandal, who is a Senior Program Manager at SafetyPin. Ma'am, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, IMPRI, for inviting me as a discussant. Elsa, as always, thank you for your lovely presentation, and Sangeeta for your inputs. So I think one of the key things in understanding, violence in public space or harassment in public spaces is data. A lot of time we are not able to understand the nature of the problem because there is not enough information available. And also there is not enough spatial information available. Like what Elsa is doing through her app is like actually locating the information in the place. And to that, adding to that, me also as an architect and an urban designer, and as a spatial kind of a person, I do understand that, and that the built environment has a lot to do with how harassment in public spaces or violence in public places takes part. The built environment actually creates opportunities for people to commit those crimes or harassment in public spaces. And the nature of the built environment is not only bricks and buildings and infrastructure and all of that, but how people kind of operate and behave in those places is the other thing, which also the built environment kind of gives you the clue to be like that. Since the December 16th case was kind of brought forward, and what we also do in Safety Pin is to basically map the built environment or the features of the built environment which creates opportunities of crime or violence or safe access to places. Since, like I'm saying, since the December 16th case was kind of discussed, if suppose last mile connectivity was robust in our city, if the girl was able to take a safe, convenient, a reliable public transport, she may not have taken that bus.
Yes.
If the city was designed in a certain way that you could go to place A to place B and be seen by everyone, like we talk about eyes on the street, where there is enough activity on the street and people can see what's going on in the city, then probably she would not have faced what she did. Similarly, like all of this, like street lighting, like what we map in Safety Pin, some of the key features is obviously seat lighting. And like Elsa had already elaborated in that if the place is dark, obviously nobody will step, leave alone women, even men will think, twice about stepping in that area. So street lighting is crucial. But similarly, access to public space is also crucial in women's access to all other opportunities and resources in the city. So when you one is obviously safe access, but is indirectly linked to other accesses in the city. Like if I have to go to study, and if I can, safely go up to a place which is little away from my home, but I can safely go there, then my parents will allow me, because otherwise, or maybe I will feel safe to go there. So similarly, lots of women's access to opportunities are being curbed because the city, the built environment of the city does not support it. So through, I think, infrastructure, through how cities are, in terms of activity and planning, how cities are planned, that is a crucial thing, and which is what we kind of map as through Safety Pin. So Safety Pin is basically a tool which kind of gives you, helps you to map the city for in these different layers. It also gives the user, a tool to kind of give their opinion about the public space they're using. So through the My Safety Pin application, you can actually audit a place through all these parameters which we have. Say whether transport is accessible, whether you can walk on it, whether there is street light there, whether enough people are there, whether enough women and children are using that space. So I guess all of this is information, and all of this information, if it can be made available on your fingertip, in your phone, and be kind of be used and analyzed to understand the city better, obviously we are making a progress into this issue we are trying to deal with in terms of violence and harassment in public spaces. But I agree completely with Sangeeta that digital divide is a big thing which also we need to understand, especially in a developing country like ours, that not everyone has an access to has access to a smartphone which can do all of that. So I guess advocacy, sensitization, all the other programs, which all have to come together to address the issue, is important. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insightful comments. Professor Vibhuti Patel, would you like to add your comments at this point? Or
I think,
should we go-
at this, what Dr. Sangeeta Datta Gupta and Ritti said, I would like to also say that only technology is not enough. We need to have, as you said, that in Safe City discourse, what ecosystem and what kind of what's built environment is there. Like in Bombay, that's what we found after Shakti Mill rape case. There were 400 unsafe places, and the NSS students, Akshara and Bombay police worked together that under construction buildings, they were the major places which were very threatening to ordinary citizens, lonely people, and also women and young girls who were going to school or who were lonely. They were attacked by them. So I think very important. Another thing is that this kind of during 80s, we used to also organize assertiveness training program, because as Elsa very rightly said, that you freeze, flee, or fight. These are the three responses. So we used to say how to fight back, and so many workshops and training programs were organized in schools and colleges, and even for the working women by the trade union, and also by the working women's associations which were formed in various service sectors. So they were also like assertiveness training. It all started with the nurses, because the nurses were the ones who were facing a lot of attacks, especially in the five-star hospitals and all. Well, all these tourists would come, and when they did not, those days we did not have many five-star hotels. So those who did not get in Taj and Oberoi, they would check into these luxury hospitals, and nurses were facing tremendous problem, and it all started with mobilization of them. So how to use your lung power, how to use your tongue power, power of language, I think that is also very important. Like when I joined Sophia in 2002, in 6 months we launched some 10 courses, and in that also we said that even courses on counseling. So similarly, if Elsa can also come up with a course where both technology and beyond technology, what can be done, no? The capacity building courses, and if the training module is created, then it will be useful across the line, because even World Bank has said that in 21st century, the major occupational hazard is gender-based violence and the sexual assault. Women are entering all sectors of the economy, and male anxiety is creating this kind of backlash of violence. So I think it's very important that the work, which such a valuable work that you are doing, it just doesn't remain among young women, but even so many elderly. Currently, in last 3 days, we have heard 3 cases of murder of elderly women. Why couldn't they could not, and all of them were lonely elderly women. How can we empower them with both technology, the fear of technology, how to overcome that, and also what kind of other support systems that can be created. You are perfectly right that every time, you don't, our slogan in the 80s was, there is a women united will never be defeated, and there is strength in number. But currently the life we have, so many times we are alone, and how can we combat that? So I think that I find very important, that we, technology, yes, it is there to aid us, but at the same time we have to have, there is nothing as powerful as social solidarity. So reaching out to each other, and also the whole town planning. As you said, eyes on the street, very, very important. In Bangalore, they have tried that. The areas which are most dangerous in terms of assault on children, assault on elderly, assault on young women, those areas, when the elderly people started coming out on the footpath, and whole evening, 4-5 hours, they used to sit, chat, have tea, and this lot of activities were happening, then those areas became safe. So there is an alternative, and I think your experience can be really, it needs to be amplified. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. We also have Ishika here with a question. Ishika Chaudhary. She is a researcher at IMPRI and a bachelor student at the Lady Shri Ram College for Women, New Delhi. Over to you, Ishika.
So thank you, ma'am, for such an insightful session. I really appreciate the work you are doing. So, ma'am, my first question is that, like, ma'am, when we talk about community engagements, so, ma'am, we know that the community of India still questions a woman's choices, like when she is being raped, like why you were out at that point of time, why were you dressing in that way? So, ma'am, I wanted to ask, like, how you engage the community in that sense. And my second question is that, ma'am, when you talked about institutional accountability, so, ma'am, recently a Bombay High Court judge said that when you grope a woman without skin to skin contact, it doesn't count it as sexual harassment, which is a statement which really bothers me. And, ma'am, 2 days before only, the Supreme Court judge said a man, a rapist, to marry the woman he has raped. So, ma'am, these judgments really made me wonder, like, where our institutions are going, and like what kind of judgments they are saying. So, ma'am, my second question is this, and ma'am, my third question is that, being a college-going student, ma'am, I take metros and use public transport daily. So, ma'am, as you talked about, like those staring eyes and inappropriate touching in metros happen really frequently metros. So, ma'am, I remember one day when I was taking metro and I was also harassed by a boy. So, ma'am, when I came back to my home, my daddy asked me, like, you were looking beautiful that day, and probably you should dress in a more appropriate way so that a boy doesn't harass you, because when you look attractive, you just invite it. So ma'am, like these questions really made me wonder, like what are our norms and what we really want from girls. Like we just like pays the whole onus on their shoulders, like you have to be this way, you have to dress in a particular manner, you have to be out on a particular time, you should be careful, you don't do that, this. So ma'am, I just wanted to ask you, like how you deal with these questions. Yes ma'am, so yeah.
So is it addressed to me? Okay.
Yes. So over to you, Ms. Elsa-Marie, to respond to these comments
Okay.
and questions.
So, you know, it boils down to the patriarchy that is steeped in all our minds, whether we are men, women, whether we are the CGI or the High Court judge or the parent or the elder in the community, right? And we are all at different levels in our understanding and our sensitivity, which is why there needs to be a lot of education. So when I first started, I launched the crowd map. But I quickly realized that you can't just put technology out there, you know, like what's the point of the technology? People don't even know what happened to them is actually inappropriate and under Indian law, a crime. So which is how we started doing all these workshops. And the workshops are really going back to, you know, simple basics like, you know, what is sex, what is gender, what is sexuality, and what are these harmful stereotypes, and how, what are the examples in your day-to-day life, exactly what you said, you know, and how it restricts one gender from truly exploring all the opportunities that are available out there. Now, one session is never going to solve the problem, but when you create a space where this conversation can become a regular conversation, then it builds the confidence of the young people or even the older women out there or whoever to start engaging. And if you take a confrontational approach, it doesn't work. I'm also a Rotary Peace Fellow, so I take the preventive approach, you know, and I believe in restorative justice as well. So in our communities, you know, we use the data and the stories to bring about empathy. When the young men who are staring or commenting, no one has told them that, probably nobody has told them that that's incorrect, right? Probably it was never covered in their school curriculum. So to expect somebody to know that what he is doing is incorrect is like really, you know, it's a hard ask. Or he is modeling what he's seeing. He's modeling what he's seeing in films, in ads, and people around him. Maybe his father's doing it. Maybe his uncles are doing it. Maybe the people he admires are doing it. And that's what he thinks is okay. So when you start having these conversations, and the way we work in communities is we don't work directly in communities. We partner with an NGO who already works there. Maybe they don't work on this specific topic that we do. So we become their more likely partner because we come in with that niche area that we are working with. They already have trust. So whatever constituency they work with, it could be girls or it could be women, we first work with that community and then we slowly expand that circle to include the men and boys in their community. And that's very interesting because when the men and boys are included and they realize that what they are doing is incorrect, or even take, for example, our data analysts, most of them are, I would say 50% are men, young men, when they start analyzing the data and they read these stories, for them, they've never heard them, right? Because of the silence around it. So for the first time, for the first time, they're kind of actively listening to the stories or reading the stories and trying to make sense of them. And I find that is a very enlightening process for themselves as individuals. Many of them have told me how, you know, their understanding has changed. So I'll give you an example. Our data analyst, the first time, you know, he analyzed the data. He said, this data set is all wrong. And I said, why do you think it's wrong? And he says, well, the peak is around noon. So I said, and what's wrong with that? And he said, the peak of these incidents should be in the night, in the dark. Doesn't sexual harassment happen in the dark? And I said to him, but we are mapping in public spaces. And this is the time when women are in public spaces. When it's dark, they are at home, and that's a different kind of violence. At that time, we weren't mapping domestic violence. So he didn't even realize that there is a difference, you know? And so when you think of the High Court judge, or you think of the CGI, or you think of the urban planner or the government official, we assume they know these things, but they are not planning for it. They are not taking into account women's lived experiences. And that is how this data set works. You know, often I've been asked, like, but what do you do for that one individual woman who reports? And I tell them that ours is an anonymous reporting site, so that woman who's reporting knows it's anonymous. She's not really expecting something directly to happen in her case. But what her story is doing is it's going into a data set, and then we are analyzing the trends and patterns in that data set, and then trying to change that system or that community or your individual mindset so that you can make that change for everybody, you know. And it doesn't matter if the incident happened today or yesterday or 6 months back or 6 years ago. We want to know, because if it wasn't documented, in effect, it didn't happen. Your experience didn't happen. There's no proof it happened. And not that the police are going to directly act on your individual case, because we are not asking you who you are or who the perpetrator is either. So it's hard to solve that individual case, but we are definitely trying to collect more information, because it's not available, on helping us understand the context in which this crime happens. And I would recommend you all read that paper by Girija Borkar, where she's used safety pins data as well as Safe City data to understand how sexual harassment affect the young women in Delhi. And she says that they compromise on the quality of their education because they may choose colleges and institutions closer to home. That's because they don't want to travel by public transport, or public transport may not be available. And the second thing is that there is a cost to even public transport or transportation choices, because they spend about, on an average, $250 a year or $290 a year, which is almost a starting salary of somebody, you know, I mean, a month's salary of somebody starting out. So they drop out of the workforce, they drop out of education, and they also compromise on their options. So, and that's reflected in the labor force, right? India has a very low participation of women in the labor force. So everything is linked, but how do you prove it if you don't have the data? You know, and that's really why I think what we are doing at Safe City is really important, and it adds a lot more knowledge to what everybody else is trying to also do. I hope I've answered your 3 questions.
But I think McKinsey report has also brought in 4 factors for declining work participation. And the 4th one is a safety issue, especially mobility. That is, it's the elderly care, child care, automation, and the new technology which is entering, so women are replaced. But safety, after 2013, the drastic decline from 34% to 27% happened in 4 years' time. That also because it's a major macro level study, and we say safety issues, and especially mobile. Even Disha study is showing the same, UNDP study on the skill mission, that even women who are after getting the skills, why aren't they getting, if the distance between the home and workplace is very high, and they have to change 2-3 buses and all, then the harassment to the street and insecurity of travel, that is responsible.
Thank you, Mr. Silva and Professor Patel, for your response and such pertinent points. We will go once again to all our panelists, but before that, I will just read out some of the comments and questions that have come up from the audience. So some of the comments that are coming in are such as police officials do not register complaints. We need to empower them as well. What if anonymous complaints are fake? Do you have a filter, and what do you do with these complaints? Even aviation is not safe. We have seen how men inappropriately touch female co-flyers. Till when will women make adjustments to such nuisance? The mindset of men that objectifies women's spans, education, incomes, lifestyle, etc. Yes, and then of course, Soma KP ma'am has said that solidarity is imperative. Technology gives information to strengthen our strategies and outreach. Technology also influences mindsets with the kind of misogynistic messaging that is perpetuated. These are some of the comments and some of the questions that have come up. One from Shalu Kumari is that how can we empower boys to not misuse technology to put women in a bad light? I think we have done enough to teach our girls to do this and not do that, but we need to teach our boys to do this and not do that. Your views? She also asked, you're mentioning showing pornography as a way of sexual violence. Should it not be banned outright? We should be a zero tolerant society for any incident of sexual violence. From which country can we learn? What are the lessons? I guess from conservative and authoritarian governments. Share your views on that. Then someone has added to what a point that Dr. Datta Gupta has brought up, that they would like to point out that the stigma associated with usage of mobile phones by women, and this just restricts their ownership of a mobile phone, making it impossible in some parts for women to use technology. So maybe you could share your views on that as well. And then some more questions. Can't we develop a technology to educate men and patriarchal women to know that skin showing does not give them right to stare and touch? Apps should be developed to help their mentality. Yes, then there are some more comments resonating the same views. I believe parents should also be told how to teach their male child to be chivalrous. Yes, and of course, sex is not talked about at home. No one is taught about good or bad touch, except only an isolated workshop happening in school for one day. School curriculum should have sexual education as an additional subject, if not main. And families should be aware of how to teach their girls and boys to react in different situations, which involves exploitation. So a bunch of comments and questions coming in. So these can be kept in mind as our panelists and speaker respond in this next round. So we will go once again to Dr. Sangeeta Datta Gupta and then Ms. Riti Mandal.
Would you like me to answer that particular question about the technology?
Yes, ma'am, I think it was addressed to you, yes.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'll just share my experience because I have worked with them, and I found out that when they're using technology, it was not about gender-based violence, it was about using technology for expanding their own business. And I found out that those who are using it effectively, either displaying their products on WhatsApp or getting connected to suppliers, they were able to expand their business. And also, because sometimes the social norms are such that in rural areas, you're not allowed to talk to the strangers. So that was also taken care of because they had the smartphone and all that. So yes, you're right. But what we found out, what are the challenges? If there's one smartphone, it's usually in the male member having that smartphone and the women not having access to it, not even phone or smartphone. So that is one challenge. And we try to find, and of course, many of them were not literate, so they did not know how to use it. And there's as you rightly pointed out, that is some sort of stigma associated that it was using a smartphone, probably something to do with the character or something like that. So those things are also there. But what we found out through our survey and all that is that women, they're open to use smartphones, they want to use, and if they're trained and they have access, and they are actually using it better than men to expand their business and all that. Because if you go by the self-help group statistics, the repayment is if it's a 99% repayment if it's the women when they take loans. So actually they're using it better. So that's what I was trying to put forward, that is that yes, if the technology, not just in the cities and even in the rural areas also, this can be very, very effective, because women have started understanding the uh, importance and the usefulness of having a smartphone, having access to technology, that they have started understanding. And some women we have tracked over a period of say 4 years, and we found out with two, it started with two women, and right now they're employing 150. That means they're also creating employment for others. And one more thing which is very, very important, once they start earning, in many cases sexual violence, as Miss Elsa was also pointing out something, they don't, it's not reported. So, and in the rural areas, it's very difficult to actually raise your voice against the sexual violence. But it's even more difficult. It's difficult for, it's everywhere, but in the rural areas, even more difficult. But if the women are empowered in terms of like, if they're earning and if they're actually, if the income has gone up, then in that case, they're actually in a position to raise their voice against a lot of things, domestic violence, alcoholism and all that, and against sexual violence as well.
Yeah, I may, I may add to that. It's like, it's very true. The digital divide is really deep, and especially in the rural areas. So if the smartphone, they cannot reach the smartphone can reach them. I can put it like this. So what we do through one of our programs is like, because so many women cannot use smartphones or do not have access to a smartphone or do not have the digital literacy to use the smartphone, we do a workshop, which is something called like Safety Chaupal, which is basically a sensitization program, which we take the phones to them and teach them about the built environment and how do you really look and understand the built environment, which can pose as a threat to you. So and we kind of run a whole workshop and a program around it, saying that, street lighting, what it does, okay? Or, if you don't have access to public transport, how are your choices limited? Or if you cannot walk in the pavement, if you are or cannot access a certain locality because there are not enough people in there, or how the locality is kind of used, because probably the land use around that locality is kind of not conducive for public use, So things like that, all those information is shared with them, and smartphones are given to them to record or, get their own information recorded as a crowdsourced data. So that could be one way of doing it. Like, it could be a part of an advocacy sensitization program, but that could be one way of doing it. And similarly, a lot of kind of interventions and approaches like this can, like I was saying, join hands together to do it. Like Elsa had given an example, a beautiful example of doing a mural. I also know an artist in Delhi who had done it very effectively. And it was a similar approach, like doing a mural around a chai stall to kind of also inform the men that, what happens around the tea stall or what happens around the male dominated area. It's a tea stall somewhere in Gurgaon, it's a different story altogether. It's thekas everywhere, okay? So, and the thekas are actually in the green belt. So the road, the footpath, the green belt, the thekas sit right in the green belt, and it becomes impossible for people to cross that area, especially women and children to cross that area, because it's dominated by men and you would not want to go there. But if the built environment is such that, there are enough people around it, there is transport stops around it, there is shopping around it, and it's part of a larger development, then obviously that does not pose as a threat. So all this information or all this understanding of the built environment has to be shared with people, have to be kind of through different programs and platforms, has to be shared with people. And also locating the stories, like it's like I told before as well, that what does the technology really do? It's not really, it is for the women, it is for, and whoever is kind of giving this crowdsourced information in there, whether it's a Safe City app or a Safety Pin app, is anonymously doing it. I mean, in Safety Pin, you can put in a name, but you can also kind of not give that information. And it's not necessary that every time it is a woman putting that information. Suppose it's a male member whose friend has been whatever, and the friend doesn't want to do it, and the woman and the man does it, or somebody else does it. So it also gives visibility or understanding, at least to the people who are, let's say, digitally literate, and they would want to explore different kind of applications. It actually opens the door to everyone, even though it is kind of collectively looking at a certain information about women and safety and violence in public spaces. So yeah, so I mean, it's unfair to look at technology only because the app is kind of directed towards that. That's obviously its objective. But in the larger spectrum, it does kind of gives more visibility, access, etc., to other people as well, and raises awareness around it. Yeah, thank you.
Can I add? So technology, like Rithi said, is just the enabler. And yes, the digital divide is really there, even in urban spaces. I think women just don't have time to use a mobile phone for anything other than a call or WhatsApp. And that statistic is, women do 5.5 hours domestic care work more than their spouse. So that will tell you that there's absolutely little time in the day for any pleasure or any browsing or whatever. Anyway, having said that, I think in rural areas, what we've done is identified who has the mobile phone or who has the technology, and can they digitize the stories, because what for us is more important is, does the community have an insight as to what is happening there, and do they have access to the data? And fake reports. So the way it works is somebody logs a report on our site and somebody has to review it at the back end. Now, because these are anonymous, you don't know whether it is true or not. That's crowdsourced data. You don't know, but we look at trends and patterns, and for something to be false, the whole trend and pattern has to be false. You don't go for outliers. Having said that, because I've been reviewing all these reports, I know you can make out if it is fake, because it's kind of the language that is used when somebody expresses it. And we have had in the past somebody who it appeared to have had mental health problems because he was taking, I'm saying he, I don't know who it was, but the person reporting was taking names of who had harassed. And at that time, now we can't check IP addresses, but in our previous version of the Safe City platform, you could check IP addresses and it all came from the same IP address. So then it was an anonymous report. So we put it out on social media saying we've been getting a bunch of reports on a particular theme. If somebody wants to reach us, this is our email or contact number, but the report stopped, And whilst we say that ours is crowdsourced, I would say 90% of our reports come where we have face-to-face interactions or some kind of on-ground activity happening. So you kind of know where it's coming from. That's how I would say that we use the data. And as for aviation being unsafe, where people are groping you on the plane, that's the kind of behavior that's reflected online in virtual spaces, in public spaces, in any space, so till we fix mindsets, and that's where education is the need of the hour. It's really critical at all levels. We have to be talking about what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, and how do we treat people with respect, not just women. Take the farmers' protests and so many other things. We don't, the intersectionality matters, and all these things we need to put it out there and have honest conversations about.
Right, rightly said.
ma'am. Before we go into the way forward from each of our panelists, we also have Dr. Simi Mehta, who is CEO and Editorial Director of IMPRI, to make her comments. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Anshula. Thank you, Ms. Elsa and Ritti. Thank you so much. Nice to meet you again. Professor Patel, for your comments, and Ishika and Dr. Sangeeta. My worry or my concern is that uh, we need to partner, or the technology needs to partner with the law and order, or the police, the authorities. And unless we are able to do that, we are able to voice our concerns through safety pin or through safe cities, but still things are almost status quo. um, why not actually have workshops with these police officers and male police officers, make them hear them out, what are their points of views? Because experiences have shown that they themselves do not want to get into a case where their police station would come under the ranking that there are a lot of gender based violence in their area. So rather they would want that, okay, samjha bujha kar, or you just explain the people, explain the women that, okay, just or somehow you patch up with your harasser and then go back, so that no cases are lodged. So we need to empower the male police officers to understand things with a little bit more of a sensitivity. And because sexist comments, or it is, everything is very rampant. It is rampant in the parliament, from the parliament to the local bodies. So we really, how much hope do we have with our politicians? And this again leads to another point as to why aren't there more women in these bodies, lawmaking bodies. And another thing that I would like to point out is that, how do you there might be cases that are coming out from within the households. People might be pointing on your applications, mobile applications, etc. But do you have any partnerships with the police, with these authorities, as to reach out to them when they need help? Or I mean, how are you helping out in times of real need? That is my another concern. So basically we really need to, and of course digital divide, as Rithi has mentioned, it is rampant. And uh, should we just propose as a recommendation that all women, whether it is in the rural or in the urban areas, who cannot afford a smartphone, just that they should be given a smartphone? Because in our earlier research, we have advocated and we have made policy recommendations that a basic smartphone is the need of the hour for enabling women who do not have this. And this can have multiple ripple effects in terms of empowering them, not just in terms of their health, etc., but also for using your applications. So why not spend, instead of spending at other places? Of course you can prioritize, but why not prioritize this as well? So over to you. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Silva, you can respond to that.
So yeah, that was a lot. I think I've forgotten most of it, but we are one nonprofit. We don't have to solve all the problems. We can collaborate. We know what we are good at, and we are, doing just that bit. We have lots of partners. So if somebody does reach out to us for help, we have partners like Majlis for legal aid, and other law collectives for legal aid. So either they want legal aid or they want counseling, right? So we have partners in both those spaces who we direct them to. And in many cases, even though it's not our mandate, we have helped survivors walk through that journey. especially when they are like 17 years old and it's a family, where the family is involved. But really, I don't believe that one nonprofit should work on everything. And if you take a corporate sector, why is corporate so effective? Because they just focus on what they're good at, and then they partner with, you know, many other organizations, and that's how it should be. So that's one. And I think the way forward is education, education at all levels. I don't think policing is the only solution, which is why it's very important to understand the context in which crime happens, because it could be an infrastructure issue, not a policing issue. It could be a sensitivity mindset issue, which means you need to change that, and that can only be done through education and awareness at the very local level, which we've used art, we've used street theater. And I feel, not constraining yourself to one particular kind of solution also should be the answer, because what works in Delhi may not work in Bombay, what works in Bombay won't work in Pune, and does not work in Satara, for example. And I found the best way is to let the community decide. Tell them what the problem is through the data, which is their own data. Okay, so you're showing them the data that they themselves gave you, and then asking them, okay, now this is the number 1 or 2 or 3 problems in your community based on your data. How would you like to solve it? And then help them brainstorm ideas. But that way, I feel it's more sustainable. It's also low cost because they take ownership of it. And finally, I think, we should not get fixated about the technology part, because we are moving where everybody at some point is going to be technology savvy or digitally literate. And like was already mentioned, when women are trained and when they do have that device, then they can use it. It's not that they can't use it. So there's going to be a little bit of a struggle over there. But again, technology is not the only solution as well. I've forgotten all your other questions, so I'm sorry. If there's anything specific you want me to answer, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you for your response. So you have incorporated sort of a way forward in your comments. So we will go for a minute or two to each of our discussants again, Dr. Sangeeta Datta-Gupta and Ms. Riti, to give their final views and highlight the way forward in their opinion. So Dr. Sangeeta, over to you.
Well, I think the way forward, of course, as pointed out by Ms. Elsa and Professor Bibhuti, also technology is not the only thing. There are other ways also. But yes, going forward, what Dr. Simi was advocating, that maybe a smartphone to everyone. I'm not sure whether that is feasible or not. But maybe through the local councillors. I'm talking about within urban areas. There are enough steps being taken to address that problem, although it's not adequate, I must add, but steps in the right direction being taken. But I will again go back to the rural areas where I think we some focus required. Yes, for that, of course, maybe through SHGs, through local NGOs, I think, help can be provided. And they are actually, as I pointed out, they are embracing technology. And if that, and as education, it's women becoming literate. One thing that will happen, if they become, which I have found out, if they are empowered, then they start, stop their daughters from getting married early. They start sending their children. So they will create that generation of literate women who can embrace technology. Maybe it's a struggle right now, but yes, going forward, maybe we'll have a situation where everyone will have access to technology, and then the whole process will be very, very effective. Thank you.
Yeah, so looking at technology and how much it can do, I do agree with Elsa that if you only depend entirely on technology, probably that is not possible. And I think over the discussion we have come through various kind of instances or solutions which can go hand in hand to kind of address the issue. Also, what Elsa is saying is I completely agree that, uh, one application or one organization has a certain kind of strength, and they can only work in that area. They cannot do everything. Like what we do, we do in a preventive way of addressing this issue. Like if you make the built environment better, then there are lesser opportunities of crime or harassment in public spaces. And we don't really look at solving the problem which has right now happened, which mostly firefighting with the police is doing. Where the crime has really happened, they kind of look at various ways of solving it. Yes, sensitization, advocacy, all of that is required. So one of the ways also, I wouldn't say that the government and the authorities are not doing anything. A lot of our projects are with the government. And the government only asks us to kind of map the city, because by now, at least in Delhi, they have made the connect that infrastructure, the basic infrastructure, and we are like, I like find it so limiting to say every kind, street light, footpath, transport. These are the basic needs of the city, and they have been able to connect this to the issues of access and mobility of women in public spaces. And that's a big gain, really. All this while, all this conversation was not happening. Today, if they're saying, and they have fixed street light on safety pin mapping only, twice safety pin has mapped the entire city of Delhi, and once of about 8,000 dark spots were kind of detected in the city. And the dark spots, it's now one round of entire street light fixing has happened in the city. And now with the second round of mapping, they found about 2,000 dark spots still there in the city, but it's only in the periphery, where earlier mapping had not happened. With the first round of mapping, they have actually fixed most of the street lights of the city. Also, now they're looking at last mile connectivity. They're looking at, how sidewalks can be made more walkable, better, how more eyes on the streets can be added. So I find that every time I'm kind of repeating myself, but then these are the main infrastructural issues of the city. And like Elsa said, that it could be an infrastructure problem. It could be a, mindset problem. It could be, I don't know, some other kind of an opportunistic problem. That can also happen in city. The best cities in terms of safety and infrastructure also have crimes in it. Not everything is related to that. Not that we have reached there, and not that we should even enter that discussion. But yes, collect data, talk to authorities, and do work in every field. It's not only policing. Yes, a lot has also happened in terms of police sensitization. Programs have been run and how to write an FIR and things like that. All this has happened in Delhi. Today, Delhi's transport department is hiring. I don't really agree with the idea, but then they are also hiring this, these men who are there in the buses, so that as escorts, so that women have more access to transport. That is a stopgap way of doing it, but Delhi really needs it. If you really look at that, like Delhi's metro, if you look at it, one bogie of a reserved compartment has given more access to women at different times of the day and night. If that was not there, women would not have gained that access. Now that more women are visible in public spaces because of one transport system has taken that decision, that obviously gives women more confidence in public space, gives them more access to job and opportunities, and makes women more visible in public space. So that these are the ways you can kind of address the issue. It's a slow way of doing it, but it's an effective way of doing it. It's a preventive way of doing it. So that's so much we can do with our app or technology, and I think we should be kind of happy with what we have kind of achieved so far. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Ms. Elsa-Marie, would you have anything to add? And then we can go for concluding remarks by our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel.
No, I agree with all that was said. I think, rather than trying to only focus on the negative of technology, look at what all is possible, and especially to make something visible where it is not visible right now. Also, I would encourage you to think of the solutions, because policing is not the only solution as well. Um, and also, many women who don't report because they don't want people to be in jail, and we don't have time, so many jails as well for all those people. But what we definitely need to invest in is gender sensitivity and education to say that this is absolutely not right, and explain how it hampers women. And somebody had asked, how can we learn from countries? So take, for example, the Nordic countries usually have higher gender equality, and they have a higher reporting of crime, so it's more visible. But I think their numbers are pretty much representative of the actual. So don't be alarmed by that. But I can tell you, walking in Stockholm in the dark never made me frightened. So it's not even, so sometimes darkness, it does not equate to lack of safety. It really is the context, so you can be on a completely lonely road, completely dark, and still feel extremely safe. But can we say that for our country? I don't know yet. I'm also from Goa, and Goa is like, has pretty, I think, a lot of women in public spaces late at night as well. But I still don't think I could say that of Goa too, or Bombay from where I am. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Professor Vibhuti Patel, over to
Yeah.
you for
I
your
think
concluding remarks.
Elsa's presentation has a snowballing effect, because so many varied dimensions were discussed, right from victim blaming, which also our student friends say. And I think even in Hyderabad, when the area in which there was a massive amount of street harassment, and these girls, they said that when they were blamed by their parents and neighbors, and she said that, Appa, we are wearing burqa, even our toe is not visible, and still we are harassed. Okay, so I think that in our education and in our campaigning, and even in our training program, we have to highlight that never ever girl should feel, or a victim should feel, that she has invited this thing. Another example is that of a Dharavi, like our girls in Vacha, we work with adolescent girls. They have come up with an app. So anytime they feel that there is a insecure situation, they immediately inform other members in the area, so that they reach out. So that is also one very effective way of doing, because they have been doing relief operation right from month of March. Currently also they have been doing, and all of them are college going, junior college girls. In Palghar, when we were in a very big college with 6,000 students, and their women development program was on self-defense and women empowerment. The police officer who came in there for that program, she said that the whole district, there were only 5 police officers, and massive harassment of girls was happening, because first time these tribal girls had started going to high school. They had started changing from Nauwari, they were wearing gold sari, some of them were wearing salwar kameez also, and they were also going to college, and she said they can't cope up. They told the principals in that college, there were 3 colleges in the district, and they said, please, or these girls have to use their tongue power, they have to use their lung power, and they have to use their body to look after themselves. And that's why they started the self-defense program. So I think that was a very good, because Palghar is just 40 kilometers away from the main Bombay city, and that is what happened. In Malad, the students group, Malad also is one suburb of Mumbai, where there are 6, 7 educational institutions in both eastern part and as well as western part. And there was a group of boys who always, during peak hours, they would molest and grope women, and they would always stand near the women's compartment, and they would do that. So the students group, they decided that they would use their smartphone to take the pictures of this man who were taking, and they took the pictures, they took a printout, and they put it prominently in the railway station that these are the molesters. So naming and shaming, it worked so well that this boy just, they eloped, the whole gang, they just disappeared. So I think, and everyone. So I think there are several this programs also have taken place in last 11 months at the initiative of State Commission for Women and National Commission for Women. And basically the after all these exercises, the collective wisdom that has emerged like for National Commission and State Commission to control to address gender-based violence in terms of public education, like giving public education about the outcome of this, say, dark spaces or unsafe areas or the safety audit. That is very important. Then in PTA meeting, Parent Teachers Association, also whether it is in college or in school, to discuss this issue of gender-based violence so that parents don't blame their own children whenever it is reported, because currently all the students, whether they are college going students or school going students, all of them are so scared to confide in their own family members, no, because they think that they will be blamed. So that is one very important. In the through workshops, street play, poster, case studies, debates, discussion, short films. I think Sophia had it this thing during their online conference. They say ask the students to come up with a 2 minutes or 3 minutes of a video film, which can also be very educative. That is there. And advocacy material in local language is very important, because most of the material that we have, whether it is a training module or a documentary film or a myth versus facts exercise, because that's what we have been doing in different colleges through Women Development Cell, all is in English. Some material available because maybe because of Jagori or Manjari in Patna, they have come up with some material in Hindi. But otherwise, in other regional languages, we don't have material. So we have to see to it that team up with the NGOs there and translate the material or come up with the region specific material. That is very important. As I think both the discussants also said that we need to have a very regular and consistent police training of the police officers, because during 80s and 90s we saw a very concerted effort by the police academy to do the training, and so many active feminists and women's movement, women's rights activists were invited for the gender sensitization program. But in between, I think it stopped. And currently, we see so many young police officers using the same type of approach which we saw in the late 70s and early 80s, where victims were always blamed. I have also seen in cases of harassment of a young girl, where a police officer asked the victim to tie a rakhi, and they said, from today he is your brother. No, that is the kind of approach, and I'm talking about Bandra police station, okay, in Bombay. So I think we need massive training about gender-based violence and also the cyber crime, even after the whole boys locker room phenomena. I think we need to, there are hundreds and thousands of such boys locker room, so we need to educate. And I think all discussants as well as the Elsa also emphasized that this training needs to happen at a very young age, because our WDC is doing training program when their ideas are already formed. 19-year-old, 20-year-old, reaching out to those men, boys and girls, ideas are already formed. So we need to start this training even at a very, very right from preschool to we have to start this training about the respect for bodily autonomy, what concept of consent, what is the dignity and bodily integrities, this kind of issues. Through examples, through role plays, we need to teach them that even before taking somebody's pen or touching somebody's textbook, we take permission. Now here is a human person. How can you how can you behave in such a authoritarian or such a aggressive way? So that is there. And I think all the IT Act, we have a very comprehensive IT Act. But none of the people, even National Commission for Women, when it organizes the workshops for colleges, nobody knows about it. So I think there is a more public education required about the IT Act and various types of crimes in that and what kind of punishments are there. I think there should be more awareness, except for cyber cell. And cyber cell is also very much overworked, because in each city you would have a 1 or 2 cyber cell, and there is so much of a demand of these officers to train people. But I think we need a far more concerted, consistent effort in this direction. And also all the advancement in technology that is coming, I think about that educational institutions They have to be made aware. Continuously refresher courses and orientation programs should be organized, and the documentation of the types, intensity, spread, and consequences of gender-based violence, which Elsa and her team are doing. I think that is really commendable, and it's a very important area. And I think so that people know the gravity of situation. And once we accept that this is a important problem, then we also make concerted effort. The way we had done in the 80s and 90s, I think there is a need to do that, because now the intensity, dimension, and the consequences of the gender-based violence have also expanded and also increased and manifold, and there is exponential increase in the violence. And I think we all need to join hands. But I think what Simi said, that we need to work together. It's not only in isolation. If we work, our impact will be limited. So we need to first of all, amongst ourselves we need to network, and also like we have a special interest group. So ELSA's special interest group is that use of technology and demystification of technology, making the technology accessible. Then you are also the question of a safe city, safety pins work about the whole creation of a safe spaces within the ecosystem. That is very important. What Dr. Sangeeta talked, her focus on the rural areas, and because the crimes against adolescent girls in rural areas have increased very much, and that too because of the distance between the schools and village, or that they're also on while commuting also they face so many aggressive attacks. So I think we all need to join hands, and also with the criminal justice system, and also gender sensitization of judges must be made mandatory, because what you said is that it's not only one question of touching of when the clothes are on. In series, she gave 3 judgments. We also saw just a couple of years back, in 1 month, 4 judgments in which young girls were sexually abused, and the judge said, a woman judge, she said, oh, but this boy is only 21. He has a whole future in his will be jeopardized. He has old parents to look after. He's the only breadwinner. On those excuses, nobody even paid attention to the pain of a girl and what she had to, and what kind of ostracization she has to face. Anil Avchat's study shows that in all cases of gender-based violence of a girl or an unmarried girl, she has to end up in red area, because family abandons her and community abandons her. She gets marked. So nobody is focusing on the pain of a woman, even the criminal justice system. So I think we have a long way to go, and I think we all have to make concerted effort.
Thank you, Professor Vibhuti Patel, for those insights. And so as we come to the end of this deliberation, I would like to formally thank all our participants once. So thank you to our speaker, Ms. Elsa Marie de Silva, for joining us today and delivering this talk on using technology to address gender-based violence. Thank you for sharing your work and experience and insights. It was truly enriching. Thank you, Professor Vibhuti Patel. We were grateful to have you as the chair for this session, and you enriched the deliberation with your insights. Thank you. And to our discussants, Dr. Sangeeta Datta Gupta and Ms. Riti Mandal, thank you for joining us and for raising such pertinent points, which really became the focal points of the discussion. Thank you for joining us. And to everyone who tuned in here on Zoom or on Facebook Live, thank you for joining the discussion and for raising such important questions. Thank you.
And Shoma's responses, she's a veteran feminist. Today, because she could not speak, but I think her presence is very important.
Yes, Soma KP ma'am, of course, yes. Thank you, and we hope you tune into our future episodes of Gender Gaps as well. So have a very good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elsa. We'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.